Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. And welcome to another episode of Colorado Conversations. Our guest today is Eric Hogue. Eric, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
So that is perfect, Hogue. Or you can, my mother has numerous names for me when I used to misbehave, but Hogue will suit fine in here, Luigi.
Perfect. Thank you. Eric is the president of Colorado Christian University. He previously served as vice president of the university advancement for CCU, and previously he served as the chief development officer of William Jessup University. Eric is a former political candidate, something I learned very recently. He is also a practicing theologian and pastor. He's a radio and TV and media professional. He authored the book, The Winning Side of the Ass, The Heart and Skills of the Donor-Centric Professional Fundraiser, which is a book, of course, dedicated to helping nonprofits design a thriving philanthropic culture. Eric, thank you for joining us this morning.
Luigi, it's great to be with you. Thank you for the fine work you do.
So I think I'll start by asking you about the protests that have erupted across many universities in the United States, and we've seen some in Colorado. There is an encampment on the Auraria campus here in Denver. And I want to ask you, as far as I can tell, and do correct me if I'm wrong, none has erupted at CCU.
None whatsoever. I mean, there are conversations at Colorado Christian University about what's going on with Israel since October 7th, even historically previous to that, in reference to Hamas. But we don't have any protests at CCU. The one event we did have shortly after October 7th was to invite the Jewish community to campus and to raise $1 million in support of the victims that were targeted on that date and thereafter because of the terroristic acts of Hamas in that part of the world. So no protest at CCU.
Why do you think that is?
I think, number one, there is a Judeo-Christian understanding at Christ-centered higher education universities across the country that a lot of, maybe we would say, people of faith from the book of the Torah, the Old Testament, the New Testament, are like-minded, like-hearted, understanding both the historical reference, the origin of the Abrahamic covenant, and how many of our founding fathers and established leaders of this country would refer to that covenant and to religious liberties and faith-based ideologies and how to construct the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights for all of that. So there's a great mirroring or mesh of American history and Israeli history, and with the faith of Judeo-Christian individuals. So on this campus, there's a respect of that. There's also an understanding of what Western civilization is and what it has done for civilization around the world. And there's also a steep understanding of what it means holistically, and I think in intentionality, what it means to be an anti-Semite in reference to Jewish brothers and sisters. So, history, understanding of government construct, liberty and freedom, Judeo-Christian faith, principles of the book, Torah, Old Testament, New Testament, and the ability to look at something that's transpiring during our current episode of geopolitics and saying, Hamas is entirely different than somebody who is Palestinian. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And what happened on October 7th was terrorism. And the state of Israel, which is the state of Israel, has every right to defend itself. That is a constant message at CCU.
And that messaging comes from the highest levels of leadership. And of course, you're disseminating that message to a mostly Christian student population.
Yes, most definitely. I mean, you have faculty that would take that position. You'd have administration and our board of trustees. You would have the pedagogical structure of our curriculum, both public policy, the Centennial Institute, where we stand in our strategic priorities. All of those aspects would simply say that there is a strict and complete understanding of the alliance we have with Israel as Americans and as Christian believers.
How would you handle if there are protests on campus or in the university, and it may not be an encampment, just protests?
Well, number one, it's private property, so you can't just, there are laws against encampments on private property. You can't obstruct somebody else's right to go to class, nor to graduate. So we would take measures immediately to look at the behavior, the actions, the inappropriate actions. I might even label it sophomoric actions of these encampments and these protests, and refuse them. I'll leave it at that. We would refuse them. We would counter them clearly and with law on our side. And then if there was a desire for free expression of ideas or differing opinions or ideologies, we have a great hall to do that in with a lecture. We have a theater coming in the Armstrong Center to do that with a lecture. We can do that openly in our classrooms, like adults handle issues and not children. And I guess that would have been a sarcastic statement right there, offering my opinion on what's going on across campuses today.
So to be clear, the classroom is what you're saying. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. Is a place for debate. It's a place for discussion. And if you have a contrary point of view, I think it's correct to presume there is an orthodoxy. And if a student has a different persuasion, if you will, that would be welcome in the classroom. That would be welcome in an instructional setting. Wouldn't be welcome as a protest, correct?
Correct. I mean, there's numerous things that I want to run to on university campus protests going all the way back to the Vietnam era. I mean, there's a lot of future political leaders that come from these Tempest in a Teapot episodes that lead us in progressive ideology. I'll just leave that comment there. It is a breeding ground of a progressive regressing in our country versus embracing honest, open debate and critical thinking and dialogue of differing opinions. To your point, Luigi, yes. Our faculty would allow discussion, encourage discussion. I mean, we have open discussion every day on soteriology in the School of Theology. How is one saved? How does one come to a saving faith in Jesus Christ? Where does the origin start? Are you Arminian or are you a Calvinist? And there's differing views, and we welcome differing views. We have open discussion on the origin of creation. Was it a strict 6-day or 7-day? Was it gap theory? Was it day age? Open discussion. You can hold differing views. We have geopolitical discussions. We have bioethic discussions in our science and School of Nursing. But it's handled like everybody's an adult in the room versus everybody acting like they just came out of the basement after 35 years of age and they're a sophomore and they want to get out of class and they want to disrupt something and they want to check a box and call that successful. It's not successful. I'll say it again. It's sophomoric.
Now, I talked to Scott Wasserman, who is a political observer, quite well-known, president of the Bell Policy Center, which, I dare say probably is a more progressive think tank, if you will. And, he had a debate with Jeff Hunt a couple months ago. I think last year, that's correct, which I moderated at CCU. And, they debated the idea of quote unquote Christian nationalism. I had him on Colorado Conversations several days ago, and he told me about his disorientation, is the way he put it, at seeing his erstwhile allies on the political left, or at least some of them, question him and other Jews for their support for the existence of Israel. And I may be putting words into his mouth, but he find that very disillusioning, if you will. His central question is, if you're starting out with whether, what are you guys doing over there in the Middle East? If that's your starting point, then he could not understand it, or maybe he does, but he finds it very difficult to have his political friends have or pose that question. And so he's disoriented, he's worried. There's that side, but he's also suspicious of what he called the Christian right, and he feels that there is the Christian right wants to create what's called a theological majority or theological majorities, and he's worried about that. And I want to get your thoughts on that.
So the argument that goes way back with Falwell and the moral majority of creating a theocracy in America. I firmly do not believe there's an effort on the behalf of Christian right to create a theocracy. I think there may be a misunderstanding of how we represent our faith in the public arena. Let me detail that. The founding fathers had a religious intent of understanding faith, family, freedom, and liberty. They had the Puritans had a benchmark, a plumb line as to how to build the construct of government in this country. And even Thomas Jefferson, some may say a deist, his musing with his Dobbs letter of separation of church and state, although not a part of the Constitution, but his musing of it would tell you what the conversations were in the room. And the conversations in the room, as we start with origin, would be, we're going to create a country that offers the pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and that pursuit for everybody, and then defend it that they have a right of religious expression and religious practice and religious speech that can be a part of the arena, but it cannot be a theocracy of the arena. And that is always a third rail issue. I mean, back when I did talk radio for 30 years, people would toss that out. You're trying to make this country a Christian country. And I'll say it this way, as an evangelical Christian: Jesus died and rose again for souls of men and women. He did not do it for countries or governments. He did it for individual peoples. But those countries, Western predominantly, have created a construct where the religious freedom and individual liberties are allowed to embrace their expression and practice and worship in the public arena. There's a thin line. This country has not crossed it. I think there's a hyperventilating of people on the left when there are faith-based Christian leaders, let's just even say Catholic leaders, go back to JFK, and they hyperventilate over, what's going to happen now? There is numerous checks and balances. There are guardrails in place that a theocracy cannot happen, and it will not happen. But it's used as a third rail kind of chum in the water argument during seasons like this.
Thank you for that, Eric. Let's talk about the university. You mentioned that. Well, let me just ask you then. On the university describes itself as foremost and quote unquote an academic community of committed Christian believers, rooted in a profound respect for higher learning, framed within the Christian worldview. If you can quickly summarize, and I know I'm asking too much, I'm asking you to quickly summarize, but what does that worldview mean? And I guess more importantly, when you graduate or when a student graduates from CCU, what kind of a worldview does that student have?
That student has an eternal worldview that we were created by a sovereign God. There was a disconnect in that creation, and that sovereign God sent his son, our Savior, Jesus Christ, as an evangelical, and that there was a price paid for our reattachment of relationship with a sovereign God so that we can live a life from a perspective of a Christ-like Christian worldview, which plays into a conservative ideological worldview, which plays into an eternal worldview. So our graduates are concerned and attached to truth. They also understand grace in the midst of life. They are winsome in delivering that message, and they are committed, should be, to excellence in everything they do, so that they can be a light in a dark place, in a dark world, to help those who need help in the moment, in the future, and in a season of time. That's what I would say our graduates need to be. And all of that centers upon a worldview that begins with the gospel of Jesus Christ, with a sovereign creator who has made us all, and with an eternal perspective.
And how do you go about implementing, or I don't know if implementing is the right word, but I think you understand what I mean. How do you go about molding, shaping a young mind so that that young mind emerges out of CCU with the worldview you just articulated?
I think we talk about faith integration or biblical integration in our coursework. So there is a strict requirement of studying Holy Scripture, and that is integrated in the classroom. Our faculty represent that Christian worldview, so they're in the classroom, and then everything is filtered through what we believe to be truth. Truth about ourselves, truth about brothers and sisters, community we live in, truth about those who may think like we do and they may not think like we do. I mean, we've tagged the ability of reaching others from a Christian worldview perspective as wanting to be winsome in that expression of invitation or ideation or critical thinking or welcoming. So some may say, well, this sounds like it's an indoctrination. You don't have to believe. I mean, even Jesus himself said, if you have ears to hear, let them hear. If not, then there is no repercussion for that, only the choice that you've made not to believe. So that filter, maybe even tapestry, is predominant with our students, and it is at the foremost of their graduation, either undergrad or master's, and wherever God places them in the world. And we hope it drives them to excellence in delivering grace and truth.
There might be a perception that the orthodoxy at CCU is enforced very strictly, and therefore, if you hold a different view, or if you have an inquisitive mind, young people tend to be very inquisitive and they ask all kinds of questions, that there might be a perception that that's not welcome at all in the classroom, that you would be a pariah, if you will. And I ask the question because, that's happened in secular universities. There's an orthodoxy that often runs through, permeates a department, for example. And if you're not a part of that orthodoxy, there's kind of a way to push you out, to sort of isolate you. What are your thoughts?
Well, number one, you choose Colorado Christian University, right? You choose to apply, number one. And then there's a conversation on acceptance, that you're accepted. And a lot of that plays in GPA, major you're going to study, and then our statement of faith, and if you're going to be residential, what it means to be a residential student in community, and a code of conduct, behavior, perspective on the Holy Scriptures and Bible in the classroom. All of that is discussed up front. So ultimately, you are choosing Colorado Christian University. So that's number one. When you do choose CCU, then in the classroom, do you have the right to think differently? Yes. Do you have the right to have a different perspective on how faith originated within you, or permeates from you, or how you're growing and maturing, or where you might disagree? Yes, because you are a student in practicum, in training. Now, faculty, no, because those are employees, a part of the organization and the delivery of this compelling and distinct education. But some people may say, well, do you believe that every graduate that walks across the stage at CCU is an absolute, winsome, excellent, on fire, whatever that might mean, believer in Jesus Christ? My answer would be no, that's probably not true. But I certainly hope that one day it will be.
I don't think that's true even in actual churches.
Yes.
Not everyone, of course.
Yeah.
You know, uh, there's a criticism of the universities, broadly speaking, and the criticism is that um, um, the universities, and I think more particularly the secular universities, are producing graduates that are so-called woke, if you will, um,
Mhm.
very progressive in their outlook, um, different than what you would consider to be a classical liberal. I look at Scott Wasserman, for example, as a classical liberal. And the criticism is that we are producing graduates that will be joining, and again, we as in the universities broadly speaking, that will be joining the workforce, and in a couple years, I mean, you think about it, they will be in the students will be in the workforce within 4 to 5 years after setting foot in the university, and they're
Mhm.
changing the character of the workforces, and they will become our political leaders, business leaders at some point. Do you, broadly speaking, agree with that criticism?
And the criticism once again, Luigi, because I was writing down some notes to.
Yeah. The criticism that the universities are producing quote unquote woke
Hmm.
graduates,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
distinct from a liberal mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let me run after this a little bit with history. I do everything from history perspective. That's why I'm a conservative, because I like to conserve things that we know to be true. Joseph Lieberman recently passed, Democrat, liberal. Um, I had numerous encounters with the senator. I respected him tremendously. We had differing views on about 8 or 9 things, but both of us were patriotic toward the origin and the construct of the country, liberty and freedom. I think Senator Lieberman was a great leader. He represented his ideology well. He worked across the aisle. He could be pragmatic. He moved things forward for the good of the people, good of the country, and good of the cause. We don't see any of that today. It's not liberal or Democrat. It's woke or progressive or deconstructionalist. I mean, there is a tearing down, an educational channel where universities are teaching students how to tear everything down, woke, and then reprogram it in a progressive, I might say regressive fashion. And that is then labeled as success for the future of this country. So I do agree with that criticism in a majority of settings, not all of them. There's some hope across the country in significant universities. I think Ben Sass at the University of Florida is doing a fantastic job at that campus and in leadership there, bringing back what I would call legitimate quality higher education for the University of Florida. So there's examples across the country where that is not happening. But ultimately, I think higher ed has given itself over to the woke mentality and the progressive reconstructionalist of our country and what it means to be a land of liberty and freedom and individual rights.
You mentioned about you mentioned history and the importance of looking at history. Kind of I often think of navigating the world in terms of looking at the rear view mirror, because you don't really have you can't really see what in front of you, but you can kind of see and perceive what's happened behind you. And universities have a long history of protest. We've seen that happen during the Vietnam War. You mentioned that. In the run up to the Iraq War, the universities were immensely involved in the protest. When is a protest to your mind? And it's very difficult to judge whether a protest is correct or not right at the moment, right? Because we don't have the hindsight of history. But when does it, in your mind, the right time to protest at a university setting?
Yeah. I think you protest in the midst of order. Protests of chaos uh, never produce an outcome because they don't know what outcome they want to produce. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about peaceful protests um, versus violent protests. I wish we could go back to peaceful protests. It'd be nice. but there's no order in the protests. I mean, if you go to Columbia today or another Ivy tomorrow, or you go to a, pick a state school mid-size, there's an encampment, there's dancing, there's delivery of pizza. I mean, what are you protesting? From the river to the sea? Give me some geography. What does that mean? Are you lumping in Hamas and Palestinian people? Or are you talking about just Hamas? Or are you disregarding the statehood of Israel? What is your message? And when you encamp in the Quad and shut down classes, then you're shutting down any kind of conversation or dialogue that can happen within order, in front of esteemed faculty or sages on the stage, toward a graduation of higher education. So you've turned it into a camp or a retreat or a dance recital. So protest can happen if it has order to it and if it's law abiding. I mean, if I don't like my neighbor and how he plays his music, I'm not going to park my car in his front lawn. That's his property. But I may engage him in a conversation on the sidewalk in a winsome way to explain to him how his music is keeping us up until 2 o'clock in the morning. And can you please turn it down? Acting like an adult with great respect of somebody on the other side of the behavior or of the item that's being contested. We've lost all of that. I mean, it's vigilantism, it's sophomoric. It has no constructive communication. I mean, Luigi, if you and I went to Columbia right now, we'd have 16 to 20 different messages delivering pizza to the people in their tents. What are you protesting for? I don't know, river to the sea. Okay, great. What are you protesting for? I don't want to go to class. Fantastic. What are you protesting for? I just don't like Israel. I think we give them too much aid. Fantastic. Well, there's a dialogue we can have in a classroom. Why are you out here missing class? It is just not mature at the outset, and it's nothing more than a stunt to gain attention.
There's a feeling by many that we've lost the art of dialogue, and we can't communicate with our foes. And there's a sentiment that we view those who don't hold the same views as we are as, we're venturing into theological space here, but I'll use the word evil. If you don't believe what I believe, you're part of the evil empire. I guess we'll say Star Wars, right? Darth Vader. If you want to veer off of and maybe we can't veer off of the theological underpinnings, because what language do we use? What else do we have? But there is that sentiment. Just really quickly, how do we solve that? How do we bridge that? What are your solutions?
Yeah, we need to model it. Number one, it's not modeled much anymore. We need to model it. We have lost it. I agree. We need to stop doing this so much. Okay, social media posts and flaming people and offering 2 sentences of a retort, and the threads are 1,000 long. We need to get face to face and sit down and have a discussion. A lot of this stems from, I think, now I'm going to get into probably a theological position, and this is my opinion, but I think the deconstructing of the family unit and the decay of the family. I mean, my dad and I used to sit at the dinner table. The TV was off. Nobody answered the phone. We ate dinner, all of us as a family, and we discussed issues and we disagreed. My dad at the time, I remember some disagreements. He was 35 or 40, and I'm the young pup coming up, and I have all these young, ambitious ideas. And my dad would sit there even after the table was cleared until 8:30 at night. And we learned how to disagree with respect and love for each other. And that was modeled for me. And I carried that into my workplace, into society, and into my family. So family carries a lot of responsibility here. And the practicum of being a son or daughter raised in a family, learning how to be instructed and mentored, learning how to be wrong when you're 14 and correct yourself when you're 25, or complain about this and that when you're not married, you don't own a house, and the withholding taxes on your payroll stuff aren't coming your way, and you're trying to pay a mortgage and raise a family and determine how you feel about a tax threshold that goes to this, that, and the other. So just and what we're talking about is 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds encamping themselves in the midst of the quads. And then the parents are simply saying, well, why am I paying $100,000 a year to have my son or daughter educated at Columbia and they can't even go to class? Well, you would certainly hope that education started before you sent them off to Columbia. And if they are your son or daughter, you might want to give them a phone call right now and bring them home and sit them down at the dinner table and say, listen to me. You have a long life ahead of you. There may be things you disagree with, but this is not how we as a family behave, and redirect them in some constructive fashion versus just a ridiculous stunt.
So your
It's just
your so your advice is put down your phone, put them away, have a real dinner, talk about all kinds of things, and yeah, argue, disagree,
yeah,
but ultimately, to the extent that you can, and you probably should, you probably ought to listen to your parents,
yeah,
because they've gone through what you're going through, and they're paying for the mortgage and your education.
yeah.
And back in the day, that's how you pass wisdom to your children. That's what you're saying.
100%. I mean, even society would be that way. Find a mentor. I mean, I manage people here at Colorado Christian University because I had a senior VP executive out of New York when I was 32, and there was a change of leadership, and I was put in position to manage about 35 people. I'll keep it thin. Joe flew in from New York, and for 3 months he mentored me and how to be a young leader. This is what you should do. This is what you cannot do. You need to learn this and figure it out. Let's stay in communication. I disagreed on a couple of things. And he told me, you can disagree all you want. I'll let you make that decision, and you're going to suffer the consequences of it. And I'll be there when you suffer the consequences so you don't do it again. But the modeling has just, and I'll put a little blame on parents too. I think a lot of parents have disengaged of their responsibility of raising their children. They've handed them over to a government education. And a government education has taught them, I don't know, different tricks of the trade, protests being one of them, as a way to get your way. My wife and I raised two young children, two daughters. They all threw tantrums on the living room floor when they didn't get their way when they were 2 or 3 or 4. They grew out of that. You want to know why? We never responded to it. They learned that it was not an appropriate measure to get what they want, and they had to engage in a conversation. So I think breakdown of the family, the marriage, the construct of mentoring, and somebody in your life sitting down with you, engaging in a debate or a discussion where you disagree, and being able to walk away with a handshake. Maybe not convinced you can agree to disagree, but still liking each other. Country needs a lot of that going forward.
Eric, I think this is a good time to stop. Is there anything else you want to add, sir?
I don't think so. I mean, that was rather cathartic for me. So thanks, Luigi.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And to those who are listening and viewing this, we'll have a few more of these discussions, and we're hoping to continue this. And Eric, I'd love to have you come back on at some point in the future.
Anytime. If I'm a benefit to you, fantastic. And if you ever want to disagree on a topic, let's pick one. We can model it for others. Thanks, Luigi.
Thank you again. Thanks, everybody, and bye for now.